On August 21, 1982, Stefani leaves his apartment and gets into his car. Detectives tail him through winding streets, highways, and residential neighborhoods, never letting him out of their sight. But then, disaster. In the blink of an eye, Stefani is gone. Whether he spotted the surveillance or simply slipped away, police lose him in the chaos of city traffic. Panic sets in. Officers alert other departments and scour the area, but Stefani has vanished. Hours later, a call comes into the St. Paul Police Department. A woman has been attacked. Responders rush to the scene, finding 21-year-old Denise Williams in critical condition. She's alive, but barely. At the hospital, Denise regains consciousness and describes the horrifying events. She had been hitchhiking to a party when a man picked her up and drove her to a warehouse in northeast Minneapolis. There, he attacked her, stabbing her repeatedly with a screwdriver. Desperate to survive, Denise fought back. In the dark, her hands fumbled for a weapon and found an empty Coke bottle. She smashed it across her attacker's face, stunning him just long enough to escape. But her attacker wasn't ready to give up. He followed her, intent on finishing the job. Thankfully, a passerby intervened and called for help, putting an end to the assault. Days later, Denise revises her initial account. She wasn't hitchhiking to a party. She's a sex worker, and her attacker was a customer. Meanwhile, the surveillance team monitoring Stefani's apartment returns to find chaos. An ambulance is parked outside, red and blue lights casting eerie flashes across the scene. Confused, the team checks with dispatch and learns that Stefani himself had called the police earlier. "I'm all cut up," he said. "I got beat up and I'm bleeding." Paramedics find Stefani inside, blood streaming from cuts on his arm, face, and head. But police aren't sympathetic. His injuries sound suspiciously like the wounds Denise described inflicting on her attacker with a glass bottle. Detectives rush to the hospital to show Denise a set of mugshots. Despite her exhaustion and pain, she doesn't hesitate. "That's him," she says, pointing to Stefani's photo. It's the break police have been waiting for. Later that evening, Stefani is brought to the St. Paul Police Department for questioning. Across from him sits Detective Don Brown, who has spent years chasing the Weepy Voiced Killer. Stefani's face is bandaged, his nose cut, and his cheek covered with gauze. He claims he was the victim of a home robbery, attacked by thieves who broke into his apartment. Detective Brown listens carefully, searching for any sign of the distinctive high-pitched voice from the killer's calls. But Stefani speaks calmly and evenly, his tone controlled. Brown decides to try a different approach. He opens a folder containing photos of the victims, Karen Potak, Kimberly Compton, Barbara Simons, and lays them out on the table. The reaction is immediate. Stefani leaps to his feet, pushing away from the table. "You're not going to pin those on me," he wails. But it's not just his words, it's his voice. The calm, low tone is gone, replaced by the unmistakable high-pitched, trembling wail of the Weepy-voiced killer. For Detective Brown, it's the final piece of the puzzle. Stefani and the Weepy-voiced killer are one and the same. With Sonny in custody, the district attorney moves quickly to charge him. Denise Williams' testimony, paired with the bartender's confirmation that Stefani was with Barbara Simons the night she died, strengthens their case. But prosecutors want to do more. They hope to tie Stefani to the attacks on Karen Potak in 1980 and Kimberly Compton in 1981. There's one problem: evidence. Apart from the Weepy-voiced phone calls, there's nothing concrete to link Stefani to the earlier crimes. To ensure a conviction, the DA decides to focus on the attack on Denise Williams and the murder of Barbara Simons. As they prepare for trial, investigators dig into Stefani's life, uncovering a past marked by turmoil. Born the youngest of 10 children, Stefani grew up near Austin, Minnesota. His parents divorced when he was young, and his mother remarried in 1947. His stepfather, a staunch Catholic with a violent temper, ruled the household with an iron fist. Punishments often turned physical. When Stefani misbehaved, he was smacked on the head or thrown downstairs, leaving him bruised and battered. Outwardly, the family appeared devout and orderly, and no one intervened. By the mid-1960s, Stefani moved to St. Paul, taking jobs as a janitor and shipping clerk. He met and married Beverly Leiter, and the couple had a daughter shortly after. For a while, Stefani's life seemed ordinary, but by the late 1970s, things began to unravel. His marriage fell apart not long after his daughter's birth. After his divorce, Paul Michael Stefani's life unraveled. His wife left, taking their daughter, and he never saw them again. Romantic relationships were fleeting. One girlfriend left him to return to Syria for an arranged marriage. Rejection followed him everywhere. For Detective Don Brown, this pattern of abandonment and loss was more than coincidence. It was a spark that may have ignited Stefani's violent rage against women. Brown also sees another connection: Stefani's strict Catholic upbringing. The belief in confessing sins for absolution aligns eerily with the Weepy Voiced Killer's desperate calls. Stefani seemed to think that confessing his crimes would wipe the slate clean. It took 18 months for the Minneapolis District Attorney, Tom Foley, to prepare the case. By February 1984, Stefani was ready to stand trial for murder. The prosecution's case centered on the infamous phone calls. To link the voice on the recordings to Stefani, Foley initially called a voice expert, but the judge dismissed the testimony, deeming it inadmissible. Foley adapted. If an expert couldn't testify, he'd use someone who knew Stefani intimately: his sister, Judith. In court, Judith sat in the witness box. As the chilling 911 calls played, tearfully she confirmed the voice was her brother's. The prosecution also relied on eyewitness testimony. Denise Williams identified Stefani as her attacker, and the bartender confirmed seeing him with Barbara Simons the night she was killed. Despite the lack of physical evidence, the case was strong. On February 28, 1984, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty on all counts. Stefani received 18 years for the attack on Denise Williams, and an additional 40 years for the murder of Barbara Simons. With Stefani locked away at Oak Park Heights Prison, his case faded from public attention. But the families of his victims couldn't move on. Karen Potok, his presumed first victim, continued to suffer from the injuries she sustained on New Year's Day in 1980. Kimberly Compton's family was left without closure, unable to prove that Stefani was her murderer. For years, these wounds remained open until 1997. 13 years after Stefani's conviction, a guard at Oak Park Heights Prison reached out to Lieutenant Joe Karakoran, who had worked the case in the 1980s. Stefani, now 53, wanted to talk. He had a favor to ask in exchange for something invaluable: a confession. The request was simple. Stefani wanted photos of his mother's headstone to keep in his cell. Karakoran agreed. Once Stefani had the pictures, he kept his promise. Sitting across from the lieutenant in a small prison cell, Stefani revealed he had terminal cancer. He had less than a year to live. Driven by his Catholic faith, Stefani was ready to confess. In a frail voice, he admitted to everything the police had suspected: the attack on Karen Potok, the murder of Kimberly Compton. Both were his crimes. But Stefani wasn't finished. In a shocking twist, he confessed to a third murder, a crime no one had connected to him. Stefani's trademark had always been the emotional phone calls, but after this murder, there was no call. Without his confession, the link might never have been made. There was a complication, however. Stefani's memory was failing. He couldn't recall his victim's name or address, but he remembered drowning her in a bathtub. And he wasn't done. There was more he wanted to share. Stefani provides detectives with one final clue: the layout of his victim's house. He describes it in detail to Lieutenant Karakoran, even recalling how he pushed her purse into a mailbox, just as he had with Barbara Simons. But after this, he shuts down. Stefani believes he's fulfilled his end of the deal, and the conversation is over. As Karakoran leaves Oak Park Heights Prison, a sense of dread settles over him. Identifying Stefani's third victim will be a daunting task. Detectives sift through cold cases, searching for one that fits Stefani's confession. Days later, they find it. In July 1982, a month before Denise Williams' attack, Kathleen Greening, a 31-year-old schoolteacher, was found dead in her home. Her death was initially ruled undetermined, with her husband as the prime suspect, though he denied any involvement. Korokurin reviews Stefani's description of the house and his actions with the purse. The details match. The final piece of evidence is found in Kathleen's phone book. As detectives scan the pages, they freeze. There it is, an entry for Paul S., along with Stefani's phone number. His name had been in plain sight all along. Detectives don't know how Stefani and Kathleen met, or what their relationship was, but his confession leaves no doubt. Paul Michael Stefani killed Kathleen Greening. News of the confession reignites media interest in the case. Reporters scramble to interview Stefani, eager for insight into his motives. Caroline Lowe, a journalist at WCCO, secures an exclusive interview with the infamous killer in the summer of 1997. Sitting in the prison's waiting room, Lowe feels a mix of nerves and anticipation. Meeting a man responsible for such brutal crimes is an opportunity few journalists get, but it's a heavy responsibility. The sound of footsteps breaks her thoughts. Stefani enters the room, escorted by guards. His once dark hair has turned silver, but he remains a large, imposing figure. It's easy to see how he overpowered his victims. Stefani greets Lowe with casual small talk, his demeanor eerily disarming. He speaks as though they're old friends, discussing the weather. When asked about his murders, Stefani's answers are vague. He describes sitting in his car at night, consumed by the chaotic thoughts in his head, sometimes hearing voices telling him to kill. As he recounts Kathleen Greening's murder, a chilling smile crosses his face. It's as if he's reliving a fond memory. Lowe also brings up Stefani's Catholic faith, a theory detectives had long considered. He admits that after one of his murders, he went to church and wept. In a higher-pitched tone, reminiscent of his weepy voiced calls, Stefani reflects on his failing health and limited time left. All he wants, he claims, is to confess and make what little amends he can before he dies. When Lowe leaves the prison hours later, she's left with a mix of emotions. The interview doesn't provide all the answers the victims' families need, but it offers a semblance of closure. Finally, there's no doubt about Stefani's guilt in the murders of Karen Potok, Kimberly Compton, and Kathleen Greening. A year later, on June 12, 1998, Paul Michael Stefani dies in the infirmary at Oak Park Heights. His death marks the end of a long and harrowing journey for the families of his victims, a journey prolonged by years of silence, legal battles, and his chilling deathbed confession. While questions about his motives and the full extent of his crimes may never be fully answered, two truths remain clear. Paul Michael Stefani was the weepy-voiced killer, and his haunting, high-pitched wails will never echo through Minneapolis again. Thanks for watching Veil. If you're into stories of murder, espionage, and heist, hit like, smash subscribe, and ring the bell. There's always more to uncover.